Have you ever loved someone so deeply that even after they're gone, you'd do anything to keep their memory alive? Have you ever made a promise so sacred that breaking it would feel like losing that person all over again? Well, let me tell you about the promise I made to the love of my life, and how that promise led me down a path I never could have imagined. My name is Sarah, and this is the story of how grief, love, and loyalty collided in the most unexpected and devastating way possible. I need to share this with you because what happened to me changed everything I thought I knew about trust, family, and the depths of human deception. So please stay with me until the end, because this journey is one that still haunts me, even now, years later. It all started on what should have been just another ordinary Tuesday morning. I was 28 years old, working as a graphic designer in downtown Seattle, living in a small apartment that I decorated with plants and artwork that made it feel like home. My life wasn't extraordinary, but it was mine, and I was content. I'd always been the kind of person who kept to myself, who had a small circle of close friends rather than a large network of acquaintances. Growing up, I'd been raised by a single father after my mother passed away when I was just 7 years old. He did his best, but we struggled financially, emotionally, and I learned early on that life doesn't always give you what you need. That experience shaped me, made me independent, maybe a little too guarded with my heart. I'd had relationships before, brief romances that fizzled out when the initial excitement wore off, but nothing that ever felt like it could be forever. I'd convinced myself that maybe I wasn't meant for that kind of love, the kind you see in movies or read about in books. Maybe I was destined to be alone, to focus on my career, to find fulfillment in other ways. And then I met Marcus. God, even saying his name now, makes my chest tighten with a mixture of warmth and unbearable pain. Marcus came into my life like a sudden summer storm, unexpected and impossible to ignore. We met at a coffee shop of all places, the kind of meeting that seems too perfect to be real. I was waiting in line, lost in thought about a project deadline, when someone bumped into me from behind, causing me to drop my phone. Before I could even react, this man was crouching down, picking it up, apologizing profusely with the most genuine, embarrassed smile I'd ever seen. His eyes were this incredible shade of hazel, flecked with gold, and when he looked at me, I felt something shift inside my chest. We started talking, and what should have been a 5-minute coffee run turned into a 3-hour conversation that flowed so naturally it felt like we'd known each other for years. Marcus was 32, 4 years older than me, and he worked as a construction manager. He had this quiet confidence about him, a steadiness that I found incredibly attractive. He wasn't flashy or trying to impress me with grand gestures. He was just authentically himself. He told me about his childhood growing up in a small town in Oregon, about his mother who had raised him and his younger sister mostly on her own after his father left when Marcus was 10. He spoke about his mom with such reverence and love, describing how she worked 2 jobs to keep them fed and housed, how she never complained, how she taught him the value of hard work and loyalty. I remember thinking how rare it was to meet a man who spoke so openly about loving and respecting his mother. It wasn't something I was used to, and it made me feel safe in a way I couldn't quite explain. That first meeting led to a second date, then a third, and before I knew it, Marcus had become the center of my universe. We fell in love in that intense, all-consuming way that makes everything else in life seem like background noise. Within 6 months, we'd moved in together. Within a year, we were talking about marriage, about the family we wanted to build, about growing old together. Marcus wanted 3 children, I wanted 2, and we'd laugh about how we'd compromise on 2.5. He'd joke that the half would be our dog, a golden retriever we'd name something ridiculous like Pancake or Waffles. Those conversations, those silly plans, they were everything to me. For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere, like I had a future that wasn't just about surviving but actually thriving. Marcus had a way of making me believe in possibilities I'd given up on. He'd encourage my art, my dreams of maybe one day opening my own design studio. He'd come home from long days at construction sites, exhausted and covered in dust, but he'd always ask about my day, always listen with genuine interest. We'd cook dinner together, dance in the kitchen to old soul music, talk for hours about everything and nothing. I met his mother, Patricia, about 3 months into our relationship. Marcus had been nervous about it, which I found endearing. He wanted us to get along, wanted his mom to approve of me, and I understood why when I met her. Patricia was a woman in her early 60s. With silver hair she wore in a neat bun and eyes that were a mirror of Marcus's. She was polite when we first met, reserved even, and I could tell she was sizing me up, trying to determine if I was good enough for her son. I didn't take offense. In fact, I respected her protective instincts. Over time, though, she warmed up to me. We'd have dinners at her house, and she'd share stories about Marcus as a boy, showing me photos of him missing his front teeth, playing Little League, graduating high school. She lived modestly in a small house in the suburbs, the same house where Marcus grew up. The place was filled with memories, photos on every wall, little trinkets and keepsakes from decades of life. Patricia had worked as a nurse for 40 years before retiring, and she lived on a fixed income from Social Security and a small pension. Marcus helped her out when he could, fixing things around the house, making sure she had what she needed. He was devoted to her in a way that made me love him even more. Everything was perfect. I know that sounds naive, like I was living in some kind of fantasy, but for those 2.5 years with Marcus, life genuinely felt perfect. We got engaged on a rainy evening in March. He took me to the same coffee shop where we'd met, and right there, in front of strangers and baristas and everyone, he got down on one knee and asked me to be his wife. I said yes before he could even finish the question. We started planning our wedding, set a date for the following autumn, picked out a venue, tasted cakes, argued playfully about whether to have a DJ or a live band. I'd never been so happy, so certain about my future. And then, on a Friday afternoon in July, everything shattered. Marcus was on his way home from a job site when a drunk driver ran a red light and hit his truck head-on. The police officer who came to my door said he died instantly, that he didn't suffer, as if that was supposed to make it better. But it didn't. Nothing could make it better. The man I loved, the man I was supposed to marry, the father of the children I'd imagined, was gone. Just like that. In the span of a few seconds, my entire world collapsed. The funeral was a blur of tears and condolences and people telling me how sorry they were, as if sorry could bring him back. Patricia was devastated, absolutely destroyed by grief. She'd already lost her husband, and now her son, her beloved boy, was gone too. I watched her at the funeral, saw how she could barely stand, how her daughter had to hold her up, and my heart broke for her all over again. In my own grief, I felt this overwhelming need to take care of her, to honor Marcus by being there for the woman who gave him life. After the funeral, after everyone had gone home and life was supposed to go back to normal, I found myself completely lost. How do you go back to normal when the person who made your life meaningful is gone? I couldn't work, couldn't eat, couldn't sleep without seeing his face, without hearing his voice, without feeling the ghost of his touch. I was drowning in grief, and I didn't know how to save myself. It was during one of those dark, endless nights that I made a decision. I was going through Marcus's things, something I'd been avoiding because it felt too final, too painful. I found a box of documents, financial papers, bills, bank statements, and that's when I saw it. A recurring monthly transfer from Marcus's account to his mother's account. $380 every single month, like clockwork. Marcus had never mentioned it to me, but seeing it there in black and white, I understood. This was how he took care of her, how he made sure she was okay on her limited income. $380 might not seem like a lot to some people, but for someone living on Social Security, it could mean the difference between comfort and struggle. It could cover utilities, groceries, medications, all the things that add up when you're on a fixed budget. Marcus had been doing this quietly, without fanfare, without expecting recognition, because that's who he was. And in that moment, holding those bank statements with tears streaming down my face, I made a promise. I promised Marcus, wherever he was, that I would continue what he'd started. I would take care of his mother. I would send her that money every month, make sure she was okay, honor his memory by doing what he would have done if he were still here. Have you ever made a promise to someone who's no longer here to witness if you keep it? There's something sacred about it, something that feels like the last connection you have to that person. I know some of you watching might think I was crazy, that I should have focused on my own healing, my own future. But in that moment, this promise felt like the only thing that made sense, the only way I could still show my love for Marcus. So I started sending Patricia $380 every month. I didn't ask for permission or discuss it with anyone. I just did it. That first transfer was one of the hardest things I'd ever done, not because of the money, but because it made everything so real. Marcus was gone, and now I was stepping into his role, taking care of his mother the way he would have wanted. I remember sitting at my computer, my hands shaking as I set up the automatic transfer, tears blurring my vision as I confirmed the transaction. It felt like I was saying goodbye to him all over again, but it also felt like I was keeping him alive in some small way. The money wasn't easy for me to spare, not at first. I was a freelance graphic designer, and my income fluctuated depending on projects and clients. Some months were good, others were tight. That $380 represented about 10% of my average monthly income, sometimes more when work was slow. There were months when I had to skip buying new clothes, when I had to be creative with meals, when I had to say no to going out with friends because I needed to make sure I could cover that transfer to Patricia. But I never resented it. Not once. Every time I sent that money, I felt closer to Marcus, felt like I was honoring him, like I was proving that his love and his values lived on through me. I didn't tell Patricia at first that the money was coming from me. The transfers came from an account that didn't have my name obviously attached to it, and I think she assumed it was some kind of automatic continuation from Marcus's estate or insurance or something he'd set up before he died. I wanted it that way initially because I didn't want her to feel obligated to me or uncomfortable accepting money from her dead son's fiancé. I just wanted her to have what she needed, to maintain the stability Marcus had provided for her. But as the months went by, I realized I wanted more than just an anonymous financial transaction. I wanted to be there for her in other ways too. I started visiting Patricia regularly, at first just once a month, then more frequently. I'd show up at her door with groceries or flowers, offer to help with things around the house, sit with her and look through old photo albums. Those visits became incredibly important to me. In a strange way, being with Patricia made me feel close to Marcus. She'd tell me stories about him that I'd never heard, show me sides of him I never got to see. She told me about how he'd been a sensitive child, how he used to cry when he saw sad movies, how he'd bring home stray cats and beg her to let him keep them. She showed me his report cards, his little league trophies, drawings he'd made in elementary school. Every detail felt precious, like I was collecting pieces of him that I could hold on to forever. Patricia seemed to appreciate my visits too. She was lonely. I could see that. Her daughter lived across the country with her own family and couldn't visit often. Most of her old friends had either moved away or passed on. I became a regular presence in her life, someone she could count on, someone who understood her grief because I was drowning in it too. We'd sit in her living room drinking tea, and sometimes we'd talk about Marcus for hours, crying together, laughing at memories, keeping him alive through our words. Other times we'd just sit in comfortable silence, two women bound together by love for the same extraordinary man. About 6 months after Marcus died, I finally told Patricia that I was the one sending the money. We were having dinner at her house, and she mentioned how grateful she was that Marcus had set things up so well, that even in death he was still taking care of her. I couldn't let her keep believing that. I needed her to know that it was me, that I was choosing to do this, that I loved Marcus enough to make this sacrifice. When I told her, her reaction surprised me. She cried, pulled me into a tight hug, and thanked me over and over. She said I didn't have to do that she didn't expect it, but I could see the relief in her eyes, the gratitude. She told me I was like a daughter to her, that Marcus had chosen well, that she knew he was looking down and smiling at how I was honoring his memory. Those words meant everything to me. They validated my choice, made me feel like I was doing the right thing. From that point on, our relationship deepened. Patricia started calling me just to chat, inviting me over for Sunday dinners, asking for my help with things like navigating her computer or understanding medical bills. I became more than just the woman who was engaged to her son. I became family, and I embraced that role completely because I had no family of my own. My father had passed away 2 years before I met Marcus, and I had no siblings, no aunts or uncles I was close to. Patricia filled a void in my life just as much as I filled one in hers. For 2 years, this arrangement continued. 2 years of monthly transfers, regular visits, shared grief, and gradual healing. I watched Patricia's health decline slightly as she aged, saw her arthritis get worse, noticed her moving a little slower each time I visited, but she maintained her independence, stayed in her home, continued the life she'd built. And I continued working, taking on more clients, building my career, trying to create a future that Marcus would have been proud of. I dated a little bit during that second year, nothing serious. Just a few dinners here and there with men who seemed nice enough but never measured up to what I'd had with Marcus. I think part of me wasn't ready, and part of me was afraid that moving on would mean forgetting him. Patricia never pressured me about it, but she'd occasionally mention that Marcus would want me to be happy, would want me to find love again. I knew she was right, but knowing something intellectually and feeling it in your heart are two very different things. Then, about 3 months ago, something changed. I was at Patricia's house for our usual Sunday dinner, and I noticed she seemed different. She was anxious, kept fidgeting with her napkin, avoided eye contact. I asked her if something was wrong, if she was feeling okay, but she brushed it off, said she was just tired. But I knew her well enough by now to sense when something was off. Over the next few weeks, I noticed other things too. She'd mentioned needing to run errands but never specified what they were. She had new clothes, nicer than what she usually wore. Her hair had been freshly colored and styled at what must have been an expensive salon. Small things, but they added up to something that didn't quite fit with the modest, frugal lifestyle she'd always lived. One afternoon, I decided to stop by Patricia's house unannounced, something I rarely did because I always wanted to be respectful of her space and privacy. But I'd been feeling uneasy, this nagging sense that something wasn't right, and I couldn't shake it. When I pulled up to her house, I noticed a car in the driveway that I didn't recognize, a newer model sedan that looked expensive. My heart started beating faster, though I couldn't explain why. I walked up to the front door and knocked, waited for her to answer. When Patricia opened the door, I could see surprise flash across her face, maybe even a hint of alarm. But she quickly composed herself and invited me in with her usual warm smile. As I stepped inside, I heard voices coming from the kitchen, laughter that sounded light and carefree. Patricia seemed nervous, explaining that she had a friend over, someone from her book club, nothing important. But something in her tone felt off, rehearsed almost. We walked into the kitchen together, and that's when I saw her. A woman probably in her mid-50s, impeccably dressed, sitting at Patricia's kitchen table with a glass of wine and a spread of expensive-looking cheeses and crackers. The woman looked up when we entered, and Patricia introduced her as Diane, an old friend she'd reconnected with recently. Diane was polite, friendly even, but there was something about the whole scene that felt staged, like I'd walked in on something I wasn't supposed to see. I stayed for about 20 minutes, making small talk, feeling increasingly uncomfortable as I watched Patricia interact with this woman. There was an ease between them, an intimacy that spoke of more than just casual friendship. And then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Sitting on the counter was a shopping bag from an upscale boutique downtown, the kind of store where a single blouse could cost more than Patricia's monthly grocery budget. After I left, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. I started paying closer attention during my visits, and I began noticing more inconsistencies. Patricia had a new television, a smart TV that must have cost at least $800. She'd mentioned taking a weekend trip to the coast with friends, staying at a nice hotel. She'd shown me photos on a new smartphone, an upgrade from the basic flip phone she'd used for years. Each of these things on their own might not have meant much, but together they painted a picture that didn't align with someone living on a fixed income, even with the $380 I was sending her every month. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she'd received an inheritance from a distant relative. Maybe her pension was better than I thought. Maybe her daughter was helping her out financially too. But the more I tried to explain it away, the more uneasy I felt. There was something Patricia wasn't telling me, and that secrecy felt like a betrayal after everything we'd been through together. I decided I needed to know the truth, needed to understand where this money was coming from. So I did something I'm not proud of, something that goes against every value I hold about trust and privacy. One day when Patricia asked me to water her plants while she was out, I used that opportunity to look through her mail, her financial statements, anything that might give me answers. I felt sick doing it, my hands trembling as I sorted through papers on her desk, but I had to know. What I found devastated me in ways I couldn't have imagined. There were bank statements showing deposits that far exceeded what she should have been receiving from Social Security and pension. There were credit card statements with charges at expensive restaurants, luxury stores, a cruise line. And then I found something that made my blood run cold. Correspondence from a lawyer regarding a settlement from Marcus's death. An insurance payout that had been substantial. Over $300,000 that Patricia had received as the beneficiary of Marcus's life insurance policy. $300,000. She'd had this money for nearly 3 years, since right after Marcus died, and she'd never mentioned it to me. Not once. While I'd been struggling to send her $380 every month, sacrificing my own financial stability, cutting back on my own needs, she'd been sitting on a fortune. She didn't need my money. She'd never needed my money. And yet she'd taken it, month after month for 2 whole years, watching me struggle, knowing I was doing it out of love and devotion to her dead son, and she'd said nothing. I sat on her couch, those papers in my shaking hands, and I felt something break inside me. It wasn't just about the money, though that hurt enough. It was about the deception, the betrayal of trust, the way she'd let me believe I was honoring Marcus when really I was just being used. Every visit where she'd thanked me, every time she'd called me like a daughter, every moment we'd shared grieving together, all of it now felt tainted, corrupted by this massive lie. I left her house in a daze, barely remembering the drive home. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep that night. I kept replaying every interaction we'd had, looking for signs I'd missed, trying to understand how someone could do this to another person. By morning, I'd made a decision. I needed to confront her, needed to hear her explain herself, needed to understand why she'd let this go on for so long. I called Patricia and asked if I could come over, told her we needed to talk about something important. She agreed, her voice cheerful and unsuspecting, and that somehow made it worse. When I arrived at her house the next afternoon, I was determined to stay calm, to give her a chance to explain, to believe that maybe there was some reasonable explanation I hadn't considered. But the moment I sat down in her living room, all that composure crumbled. I pulled out the bank statements I'd photographed with my phone, the insurance documents I'd found, and I laid them out on her coffee table. I watched the color drain from her face, watched her mouth open and close as she searched for words. Then I asked her directly, why? Why had she let me send her money for 2 years when she didn't need it? Why had she pretended to be struggling when she had hundreds of thousands of dollars in the bank? Why had she betrayed me like this? Patricia's response started with denial, then shifted to defensiveness, and finally landed on something that shocked me even more than the deception itself. She told me that the money I sent her wasn't really about need, it was about maintaining Marcus's legacy, about keeping his promise alive. She said that if she'd told me about the insurance money, I might have stopped sending the monthly payments, and that would have felt like losing Marcus all over again. She claimed she was doing it for me, to give me a way to stay connected to her son, to feel like I was still part of his life. Can you believe that? She actually tried to frame her deception as some kind of favor to me, as if lying to my face for 2 years was an act of kindness meant to help me grieve. I stared at her in disbelief, feeling anger rise in my chest like I'd never felt before. I told her that she didn't get to decide what was good for my grieving process, that she didn't have the right to manipulate me under the guise of preserving Marcus's memory. If she truly cared about honoring her son, she would have been honest with me from the beginning. She would have told me about the insurance payout and given me the choice of whether to continue supporting her or not. Instead, she'd treated me like a fool, taken advantage of my love and loyalty, and robbed me of nearly $10,000 over 2 years, money I could barely afford to give. But as I sat there, confronting her with all of this, Patricia's demeanor changed. The apologetic, defensive woman disappeared, and in her place was someone I didn't recognize. She became cold, calculating even. She told me that technically I'd given her that money as gifts, that there was no legal obligation for her to return it or to have disclosed her financial situation. She said that if I'd been foolish enough to send money without asking questions, that was my problem, not hers. She actually used the word foolish. This woman who'd called me daughter, who'd cried with me over Marcus, who'd welcomed me into her home and her life, was now looking at me like I was an inconvenience, a problem to be dismissed. I asked her about all the new purchases, the expensive trips, the lifestyle upgrades I'd noticed. She didn't even try to deny it anymore. She told me that after spending 40 years working as a nurse, sacrificing everything for her children, living paycheck to paycheck, she deserved to enjoy the money Marcus had left her. She deserved nice things, experiences, comfort in her old age. And there was nothing wrong with that logic except for the part where she was also taking money from me under false pretenses while she lived this upgraded lifestyle. I brought up Diane, the friend I'd met, and asked if Patricia was spending my money on entertaining her wealthy friends, trying to keep up appearances with people who had more than she did. Patricia's face hardened, and she told me that what she did with the money was none of my business. She said I'd chosen to send it, that she'd never asked for it, never promised to spend it in any particular way. Technically, she was right. I had chosen to send the money, but that choice had been based on a belief that she needed it, that I was helping her maintain the quality of life Marcus had provided. If I'd known the truth, I never would have sent a single dollar. The conversation deteriorated from there. Things were said that can't be unsaid, truths that stripped away any remaining illusion of the relationship we'd built. Patricia accused me of being dramatic, of making everything about me when she was the one who'd lost a son. She said that grief made people act in ways they wouldn't normally act, implied that her deception was somehow justified by her pain. But I'd lost someone too. I'd lost the man I was going to marry, the future I'd planned, and I'd never used my grief as an excuse to hurt other people. I'd never manipulated someone's love and turned it into a weapon against them. I left her house that day knowing I'd never return. I stopped the monthly transfers immediately, blocked her number, cut off all contact. Some people might say I should have tried to forgive her, that she was an old woman who'd made mistakes, that family is supposed to stick together through hard times. But she'd proven that she'd never really seen me as family. I'd been convenient, a source of extra income and emotional support that she could exploit because she knew how much I loved her son. She'd counted on my grief making me vulnerable, making me willing to do anything to stay connected to Marcus's memory. And she'd been right. For 2 years, I'd been exactly that vulnerable, that willing. The aftermath of that confrontation was brutal. I went through another period of intense grief, but this time it was different. I wasn't just mourning Marcus anymore. I was mourning the relationship I thought I had with Patricia, mourning my own naivety, mourning the loss of what I'd believed was a genuine connection built on shared love for an extraordinary man. I felt stupid, used, angry at Patricia, but also angry at myself for not seeing the signs sooner. How had I been so blind? How had I not questioned why she never seemed to struggle financially despite supposedly living on a limited income? I tortured myself with these questions for weeks. I also had to grapple with a more complicated emotion, the realization that my promise to Marcus, the thing that had given me purpose and comfort in my darkest moments, had been built on a lie. I'd thought I was honoring him by taking care of his mother, but I'd actually just been funding her comfortable retirement while she laughed behind my back. Did that mean my promise had been meaningless? Did it mean that everything I'd done for the past 2 years was a waste? These questions haunted me, made it hard to get out of bed some mornings, made it hard to trust my own judgment about anything. I confided in a close friend about what had happened, and she encouraged me to seek therapy to work through the trauma of this betrayal. At first, I resisted because I'd always been someone who dealt with problems on my own, but eventually I recognized that I needed help processing what had happened. Therapy was transformative. My therapist helped me see that what Patricia had done said everything about her character and nothing about my worth. She helped me understand that I'd made my promise to Marcus out of genuine love, and that Patricia's betrayal couldn't retroactively taint the purity of my intentions. The act of giving, the act of honoring Marcus, had value regardless of how it was received. That realization didn't erase the pain, but it helped me start to heal. Through therapy, I also came to understand something else. Patricia was probably acting out of her own pain and trauma in ways she couldn't fully acknowledge. Losing a child is one of the most devastating experiences a person can go through, and grief can make people do terrible things. That doesn't excuse what she did, doesn't make it okay, but it helped me develop some compassion for her even as I maintained my boundaries. I could acknowledge that she was suffering while also acknowledging that she'd hurt me deeply, and that our relationship couldn't continue. About a month after our confrontation, I received a letter from Patricia. It wasn't an apology exactly, more of an explanation. She wrote about how scared she'd been after Marcus died, how the insurance money had felt like blood money, something she didn't want but couldn't refuse. She wrote about how having me in her life, seeing me every month, taking the money I sent, made her feel like Marcus was still alive in some way. She admitted that she knew it was wrong to accept my money when she didn't need it, but she'd convinced herself that she was giving me something valuable in return, a connection to her son, a sense of purpose. She ended the letter by saying she understood if I never wanted to see her again, but she hoped that someday I might be able to forgive her. I read that letter multiple times, cried over it, felt a complicated mix of emotions ranging from anger to sadness to something almost like pity. Part of me wanted to write back, wanted to tell her exactly how much damage she'd done, wanted to make her truly understand the depth of the betrayal. But another part of me recognized that engaging further would only prolong my pain. So I did something I never thought I'd have the strength to do. I forgave her, not for her sake, but for mine. I forgave her so I could let go of the anger that was eating me alive, so I could move forward without carrying the weight of this betrayal everywhere I went. But forgiveness didn't mean reconciliation. I never responded to her letter, never reached out, never sent another dollar. I let her go, along with the fantasy of the family I thought I'd found in her. The months that followed were about rebuilding myself, rediscovering who I was outside of my grief, and outside of that promise I'd been living by. I threw myself into my work, took on ambitious projects, started building the design studio I'd always dreamed about. I reconnected with old friends I'd neglected during my years of grief. I started dating again, this time with more openness, less fear of moving on from Marcus, and slowly, painfully, I began to heal. I learned some valuable lessons through this experience. Lessons about trust, about grief, about the complexity of human nature. I learned that people can love you and hurt you at the same time, that good intentions don't always lead to good outcomes, that sometimes the people we think we know best are capable of stunning betrayal. I learned that grief can make us vulnerable in ways we don't recognize, can cloud our judgment and make us susceptible to manipulation. But I also learned about my own strength, my capacity for forgiveness, my ability to survive even when I thought I couldn't. Looking back now, I can see how this experience changed me fundamentally. I'm more cautious about who I trust, more careful about making promises, more aware of my own boundaries and needs. But I'm also more compassionate, more understanding of how pain can drive people to do things they wouldn't normally do. I think about Marcus often, though the memories don't hurt quite as much as they used to. I wonder what he would think about everything that happened, whether he would have believed his mother was capable of such deception. Part of me thinks he wouldn't have been surprised, that maybe he knew his mother had flaws he never discussed with me. Or maybe he would have been as devastated as I was to discover this truth about someone he loved so deeply. I'll never know. What I do know is that the promise I made to him, the promise that led me down this painful path, came from a place of real love, and even though it ended in betrayal and heartbreak, I don't regret making it. That promise kept me connected to Marcus during a time when I desperately needed that connection. It gave me purpose when I felt purposeless. It helped me through the darkest period of my life, even if it ultimately led to more darkness. There's a strange kind of grace in that, in being able to hold both the beauty and the pain of that experience, without letting either one define me completely. I've also come to realize that Patricia did teach me something valuable, though not in the way she might have intended. She taught me that people are complicated, that they can be both victims and perpetrators, both loving and selfish, both honest and deceitful. She taught me that grief doesn't excuse bad behavior, but it does explain some of it. She taught me that forgiveness is possible even when reconciliation isn't. And perhaps most importantly, she taught me that I'm stronger than I ever thought I was, capable of surviving betrayals I never imagined I'd have to face. About 6 months ago, I heard through a mutual acquaintance that Patricia had been diagnosed with a serious illness, something that would likely limit her remaining time significantly. My first instinct was to reach out, to go see her, to put aside our history and be there for her in her time of need. But I didn't. I sat with that impulse, examined it in therapy, and realized that reaching out wouldn't be about her needs. It would be about my need to be seen as a good person, to prove that I was above the hurt she'd caused. And that wasn't a good enough reason to reopen that wound. So I sent her a card, a simple one that said I was thinking of her and hoped she was finding peace. I didn't include my return address, didn't sign it with anything more than my first name. It was the closure I needed, a final acknowledgement of what we'd meant to each other before everything fell apart, without pretending we could go back or move forward together. I don't know if she's still alive now. I don't ask about her, don't seek out information. That chapter of my life is closed, and I've made peace with that. The money I sent her, nearly $10,000 over 2 years, I've come to see as an expensive lesson in setting boundaries and protecting myself even when I'm in the grip of grief. Some might say I should try to get it back, take legal action, demand reimbursement, but I know that path would only keep me tied to her, keep me trapped in anger and resentment. The money is gone, and with it goes my last connection to Patricia, and to that version of myself who thought love alone was enough to create authentic relationships. These days, my life looks very different from what it did 3 years ago when all of this started. I'm running my own design studio now, something I probably wouldn't have pursued if I hadn't been forced to rebuild my life from scratch. I'm in a healthy relationship with someone who respects my boundaries and understands my history without being threatened by it. I've created a chosen family of friends who show up for me consistently, who prove their love through actions that match their words. I still think about Marcus, probably always will, but the grief has transformed into something gentler, more bittersweet than sharp. I can remember our time together with gratitude rather than just pain. I can honor his memory without sacrificing my own well-being. And I've learned that the best way to honor someone's memory isn't through grand gestures or financial sacrifices. It's through living a life that reflects the values they held dear, through being the kind of person they believed you could be. If Marcus could see me now, I think he'd be proud of how I survived, how I found my way through the darkness both of his death and of his mother's betrayal. I think he'd understand why I had to walk away from Patricia, why forgiveness didn't mean continuing a relationship that had become toxic. And I think he'd want me to be happy, to build a full life, to love again without guilt or reservation. So that's what I'm doing. I'm building a life that honors his memory not through monthly payments or obligatory visits, but through choosing kindness, choosing growth, choosing to believe in love even after it's been weaponized against me. The story I've shared with you today isn't a simple tale of good versus evil, of innocent victim and cruel villain. It's messier than that, more complicated, more human. Patricia isn't a monster. She's a grieving mother who made terrible choices out of pain and fear and maybe greed. I'm not a saint. I'm someone who loved deeply and got hurt and had to figure out how to keep living anyway. And maybe that's the real lesson here, that life is complicated, that people will disappoint you, that trust can be broken, and grief can be weaponized, and good intentions can lead to devastating outcomes. But also that you can survive it, that you can find meaning in the wreckage, that you can rebuild yourself stronger and wiser than you were before. I want to leave you with this. If you're going through something difficult right now, if someone you trusted has betrayed you, if grief has made you vulnerable to people who would take advantage of that vulnerability, please know that you're not alone. What happened to me might seem extreme, but in its essence, it's a story that happens all the time in different forms. People use other people. They take advantage of kindness. They mistake someone's love for weakness and exploit it for their own benefit. And when that happens to you, it's not your fault. You're not stupid or naive or foolish. You're human, and you loved someone enough to be vulnerable, and there's no shame in that. The shame belongs to the people who abuse that trust. So take whatever time you need to grieve, not just the person you lost, but the relationship you thought you had with the person who betrayed you. Feel angry, feel hurt, feel everything you need to feel, but don't let it destroy you. Don't let their choices define your worth or your capacity for love. You're so much more than what was done to you. You're everything you choose to become after the worst has happened. And that choice, that power to transform pain into growth, that belongs entirely to you. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely? Have you ever made sacrifices for someone only to discover they didn't appreciate or deserve them? How did you find the strength to move forward? Share your stories in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear, to know they're not alone in this. And if this story resonated with you, if it touched your heart or made you think differently about trust and grief and human nature, please leave a like on this video. It helps others who might need to hear this message find their way here. Subscribe to I Live to Tell for more real stories about real people navigating the messy, beautiful, heartbreaking complexity of life. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story that might change your perspective or help you feel less alone. Remember, we all have stories that shaped us, that broke us open and forced us to rebuild. Sharing those stories, listening to each other's experiences, that's how we heal together. Thank you for taking this journey with me today, for listening without judgment, for holding space for my pain and my growth. Your presence here matters more than you know.